It was the kind of March morning that felt like the world was holding its breath. The sky over Bozeman was still a deep pre-dawn blue, streaked with faint gray where the first light was trying to push through. The snow from the night before clung to rooftops and tree branches, muting every sound. The parking lot at Roosevelt Elementary was already stirring with the daily ritual. Minivans idled in a slow-moving line, exhaust rising in pale plumes. Parents sipped coffee from travel mugs, glancing at their watches, try to calculate if they'd make it to work on time after the drop-off. In the crosswalk, wearing his usual bright orange safety vest and holding the small red stop sign that had become as much a part of him as the smile on his face, stood William Hendricks. He was 68 years old, but still moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd done the same job for years. He waved at every child, sometimes crouching a hand out a sticker, sometimes ruffling a mittened hand in passing. The younger kids adored him. Parents knew him by name. In a place like Bozeman, where people prided themselves on knowing their neighbors, Hendricks was more than a crossing guard. He was a trusted fixture. That morning, the routine broke. A dark, unmarked sedan rolled quietly into the lot and stopped at the edge of the crosswalk. Detective Lisa Chin stepped out, her breath forming quick clouds in the icy air. She was dressed in plain clothes, but the authority in her walk was unmistakable. A few parents noticed her immediately. The purposeful stride, the fixed gaze locked on Hendricks. She stopped in front of him, close enough that the sound of her boots on the frozen asphalt still hung in the air. "William Hendricks," she said, each syllable deliberate. "You are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Mitchell." The words cut through the stillness like a gunshot. A father standing nearby instinctively reached for his daughter's shoulder. One mother froze mid-step, her hand tightening on the strap of her purse. Hendricks didn't flinch. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable, and held out his hands for the cuffs. To those watching, it was unthinkable. Hendricks had been the man who waved them through icy intersections, the man they trusted to shepherd their children safely to school. Now, in a matter of seconds, that trust was shattered. If William Hendricks could be a killer, what else didn't they know about the people in their lives? To answer that question, you have to go back 34 years to a Valentine's night in 1987, when a 19-year-old waitress locked the door of Rosie's diner for the last time and vanished into the snow. Sarah Mitchell was punctual to a fault. Friends teased her about how she'd rather show up 15 minutes early than risk being 1 minute late. She was 19, juggling community college classes with her job at Rosie's Diner on North 7th Avenue. Rosie's was a Bozeman landmark. Red vinyl booths, the smell of frying bacon that clung to your clothes, a jukebox that still played 45s. Valentine's Day had been busy, not with candlelit romance, but with couples stopping in for coffee and pie after an early dinner somewhere else. The snow had started just after 8, the kind of fine powder that clung to the glass and painted the streetlights in halos. Helen Kowalski, Rosie's manager, noticed that Sarah seemed distracted. She kept glancing toward the wall clock in the front windows, eyes flicking to where snow was beginning to mound on the sills. Helen asked if she was okay. Sarah smiled faintly and said she was fine, but her eyes didn't match her voice. At 10:23 p.m., the last couple left. Helen remembered the moment exactly. She joked about Valentine's ending early, and Sarah had only given her a thin, distracted smile. The diner was quiet except for the hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional pop from the coffee maker as it cooled. By 10:45, the register was balanced. The chairs were turned upside down on the tables, and the coffee pot sat rinsed and upside down in the sink. Sarah buttoned her burgundy wool coat, pulled on gloves, and stepped out into the February night. The employee lot behind the diner was small, the pavement cracked and patched in places. Her 1983 Honda Civic sat alone under a dim streetlight, a rust spot blooming above the rear wheel well. It had been a high school graduation gift from her parents, hardly new, but reliable even in the brutal Montana winters. She never made it to the car. At 11:47 p.m., Jeremy Walsh was heading home after a long shift at the lumber mill. His truck's heater groaned against the cold, the wipers pushing away a steady curtain of snow. As his headlights swept over County Road 86, a Tulane strip cutting through fields of snow, he saw something that didn't belong. A small car sat in the middle of the road, engine running, headlights on. As he drew closer, he saw the driver's door hanging open, the heater blasting, and the radio tuned to Boze's late-night country classics. The station Sarah always listened to. Jeremy pulled over, his tires crunching over snow and ice. Inside the car on the passenger seat was a brown leather purse. Unzipped, wallet inside, $43.67 in cash neatly folded. On the driver's seat, her burgundy wool coat was crumpled, still warm. The keys dangled from the ignition, swaying slightly in the heater's blast. The snow swallowed sound, but the silence felt wrong, like the night itself was holding its breath. Beside the open door, a single scuff mark marred the snow. 15 feet away, half buried in fresh powder, lay a brown leather flat, one of the shoes Sarah had bought because they were comfortable for long shifts on her feet. Gallatin County Sheriff Tom Bradley had been elected more for his record as a softball coach than for investigative prowess. His department had 8 officers to cover 2,600 square miles. None of them had experience with a major criminal investigation. Deputy Mark Stevens arrived at the scene 47 minutes after Jeremy's 911 call. In the falling snow and poor visibility, he made a fateful decision. He allowed Jeremy to drive Sarah's Honda back into town, inadvertently contaminating any evidence. The scuff mark in the snow vanished under the accumulating snowfall. Tire impressions were lost in the 26-degree cold. By 1 a.m., Sarah's parents, Patricia and Richard Mitchell, had arrived at the sheriff's office. Patricia began constructing meticulous timelines, jotting down everything she knew about Sarah's routine. Richard asked about search protocols and communication systems. Neither could comprehend how their daughter could vanish from a running car without a single clear sign of struggle, except for one lost shoe. The storm worsened. Search teams trudged through snowdrifts up to 4 feet deep, calling Sarah's name into a wind that stole the sound away. Search dogs brought in from Missoula lost the scent within hours, confused by the blizzard and contaminated scene. Local newspapers ran front-page stories questioning the sheriff's competence. Parents refused to let daughters work night shifts. The tourism board worried about the damage to Bozeman's image. Sheriff Bradley needed a suspect. He zeroed in on Helen's son, 22-year-old Danny Kowalski, who had dated Sarah briefly the previous summer. Minor inconsistencies in his alibi became the focus. Danny was arrested on March 3rd. Local media coverage all but declared him guilty. But in July, newly discovered security footage from Murphy's bar confirmed his alibi. The charges were dropped, but the damage was irreversible. Public trust evaporated. Witnesses fell silent. Patricia Mitchell's basement didn't look like a room. It felt like a vow made solid. The air held a faint chemical tang from the trays where she'd once developed photograph herself. Because when it came to Sarah, she didn't trust anyone else to get it right. Bankers' boxes ran in soldier-straight rows along the cinder block walls, each labeled in the precise, slanted hand of a math teacher. Witness statements 1987. Physical evidence photos, timeline discrepancies. At the far end stood the war map, a wall-sized print of Gallatin County pricked with pins. Red for confirmed sightings, blue for unverified tips, yellow for the false hopes that had broken her heart and kept her going in equal measure. She could recite them all. Date, time, source, why it mattered, why it didn't. Every pin was a prayer with coordinates. Most nights, after grading quizzes and prepping lesson plans, she would descend the 13 wooden steps with a mug of tea and a stack of notes. She'd set the mug on the fold-out table bought for exactly this purpose, switch on the humming fluorescent lights, and let the house fall away behind her. The upstairs clocks could keep time for the rest of the world. Down here it was always 10:45 p.m. on February 14th, 1987. The door, the snow, the 60 feet that were supposed to be nothing and somehow became everything. On the anniversary each year, she returned to the place where Sarah's car had been found. Winter air needled her lungs. She placed flowers on the drifted shoulder and set small battery lanterns against the wind. The light pooled on the crusted ice like a private vigil against time. Reporters learned the ritual. At first, they covered it with the care you reserve for a family's open wound. Over time, the faces got younger, the questions more perfunctory. Patricia didn't mind. She hadn't kept a vigil for them. She kept it so Sarah would not be alone in the cold. That yearly vigil and the basement's transformation into a relentless, meticulously catalogued investigation became the quiet engine of the case for decades. Richard, her husband, adapted in small ways that added up to a new kind of silence. He stopped asking about the basement. He learned which floorboards groaned when she came back up at 3 a.m. They began to talk like roommates. Groceries, yard work, the furnace. Two people circling the same grief from opposite shores. Years later, after Hendricks was finally in handcuffs, Richard would stand in a courtroom and call it what it was: the slow erosion of hope and a home reshaped by a ghost. His victim impact words would later etch that erosion into the record. People think obsession is dramatic. Patricia would write in her journal, "Mostly it is math. You add half-truths to weather. You subtract alibis from nights. You multiply how many times you can stand at the same patch of road and ask it to speak. False leads arrive like weather, sudden, insistent, capable of changing everything, and then, just as suddenly, gone. Drifters phone tips from county jails, trading cigarettes and attention for information that withered in daylight. A man with a calm voice swore he'd seen Sarah get into a dark pickup on County Road 86. Records prove he'd been in a Wyoming cell that night. Another sent 300 pages of tight type theory linking Sarah's disappearance to highway murders in Nevada. It was impressive, meticulous, and completely wrong. In 2008, construction workers in Highlight Canyon struck bone in the frozen earth. Patricia arrived before the tape could go up, hope burning through decades of winter. The forensic anthropologist's verdict, male, about 40, landed with a thud of a locked door. Patricia folded into Richard's arms on the snowpack. The sound she made the opposite of a breath. The highlight discovery and the way it collapsed under the bone-plain facts became one more yellow pin and one more wound. Then there was Earl Hutchinson. Earl at the hands of a man who solved problems with wrenches. Scarred knuckles, a crescent of grease that lived beneath each thumbnail, no matter how hard he scrubbed. His garage sat 2 miles from County Road 86, angled so that, when he stepped out for air, he could see the county road join 191 like two threads braided under a winter sky. On the night Sarah vanished, he was rebuilding a combine for a farmer who needed spring to find his fields ready. Around 11:30 p.m., stepping out to clear the taste of motor oil from his throat, he saw headlights behaving wrong. Stop-start, like a driver who kept changing his mind. A pickup, then another vehicle, smaller, coming fast. Movement in the snow between them. Then, only one set of lights cutting back toward town. He meant to tell the sheriff the next morning, and then the morning after that, and then the morning after that. 16 years passed. His lungs filled with cancer. With the clock finally louder than his fear, he called Detective Janet Carlson and told her what he'd seen. He died before she could sit him down and ask the question she carried around for half her career. The mechanic's final, fragmentary witness, credible and incomplete, haunted the file. Psychics sent letters in looping script and promised visions. One medium from California convinced Patricia to fund a week-long search of abandoned mine shafts based on exact coordinates. She said came in dreams. They found rocks, darkness, and the echo of their own footsteps. Carlson kept 17 such files, not because she believed, but because grief believes for you. The stack in the sheriff's cabinet thickened with human need. Confessions that melted, sightings that curdled, theories that dazzled and then dimmed. Together, they documented not just a disappearance, but a community's refusal to accept that some questions stay questions. The file's weight became its own kind of evidence. In the summer of 2019, Detective Lisa Chin entered the story the way good detectives do. Through a basement door. She was 38, with a cold case background and a forensic science master's degree that taught her 2 lessons. Evidence remembers and systems forget. In the Gallatin County evidence room, cardboard relics from the 1980s sat beside neat rows of modern drives. Procedures from 87 bore only a family resemblance to present standards. Much of what should have saved Sarah had been smudged by time and mishandling. Chin recognized the storage sins immediately. Then she saw it in a photograph. A styrofoam coffee cup pulled from Sarah's Honda, bag and paper, shelved and forgotten, because in 1987 it was just a cup. To Chun, in 2019 it was a biography. The state lab did what time and cold storage still allowed. 2 DNA profiles emerged. One was Sarah's, matched her hairbrush. The other was a man the system didn't know. Cody's returned nothing. No felonies, no hits. The past and present stared at each other across an empty line. The cup, the 2 profiles, the null result in Cody's. This was a hinge on which everything turned. So Chen did the thing new science lets you do when old methods end. She sent the unknown man into the world of family trees. Forensic genetic genealogy pulls on threads distant relatives left behind in search of their own ancestors. A private lab in Virginia amplified the degraded DNA. Computers chewed for months through millions of consumer profiles, building mirror trees, asking, who else carries this echo? On January 23rd, 2020, the results landed in Chen's inbox like a name you've been trying not to say out loud. Specifically, a match in the Hendricks family tree strong enough to suggest the unknown male was a close relative of a woman named Margaret Hendricks. Brother, uncle, cousin. The circle shrank to a handful of men. One had lived in Bozeman since 1975. One wore an orange vest every school morning. One had been a night janitor at the high school in 1987 with access to student schedules, including the kind that told you which kids worked where and when. The genealogy hit, the narrowing, the employment history that made the profile snap into focus. William Thomas Hendricks emerged not as a monster from some distant shadow, but as the man whose porch you waved at on Sunday mornings. He'd worn respectability like camouflage for decades, coaching, volunteering, keeping a garden that grew neighborly tomatoes, and visiting the sheriff's office with holiday cookies his wife baked. He stood shoulder to shoulder with searchers in '87, calling Sarah's name into fields while knowing exactly where those calls would never reach. The facade, the friendships with law enforcement, the photos and the search lines, every piece made his eventual arrest feel like a betrayal of the town's idea of itself. Chun watched, waited, and documented the ordinary ritual of a man living a double life. Coffee steaming on a porch, mail retrieved from a box with faded Montana State sticker, the pickup school parking permit on a mirror. She collected comparative DNA from discarded cups and butts, cross-confirming the match until the science felt like a floor you could jump on. Surveillance and confirmations turned suspicion into proof. You already know how the cuffs closed. Parents in parkas, breath like smoke. The stop sign, now a prop in a scene no one in Bozeman would ever forget. You know that he didn't fight, didn't shout, didn't even look surprised. The morning arrest that shattered Bozeman had been hiding in plain sight since the first paragraph of the original account. But there was something else only the detective saw. The slightest relaxation in Hendricks's shoulders when the words were spoken, as if an old ache had finally named itself. The interrogation room had the hard brightness of a surgical theater. Fluorescence found the years at the corners of Hendricks's eyes. He waved counsel like a man declining dessert. He told Chun he'd been expecting the conversation for a long time. He accepted the paper cup of coffee, as though he were still the crossing guard everyone came to for help. Those details, his calm, the waved right, the steady hands, would lodge in every investigator's memory. He started where he had to, February 14th, 1987. He had first noticed Sarah at a basketball game in January, while cleaning the gym. Something about her laugh had slapped a switch in his head that had been waiting for a finger. Over the next weeks, he learned her schedule the way you learn a route home, by driving again and again until the turns felt automatic. Valentine's night, he parked on County Road 86 with his truck's hood up like a cry for help. Sarah stopped, because of course she did. He hit her with a tire iron. It took less than 3 minutes to end one world and start another. His planning, the stage breakdown, the tire iron, the 3 minutes, all part of a confession that finally put shape to the case's darkest silhouette. He drove her to an abandoned copper mine shaft 27 miles northeast, picked in advance on reconnaissance runs because isolation is a kind of ownership. Later, the FBI psychologist would pin him to a board made of words: narcissism, psychopathy, compartmentalization. Terms that try to explain how a man harvests the trust of children every morning and spends his nights feeding a hunger that has nothing to do with food. The mine shaft, the distance, The profile language. These became the scaffolding for the court's understanding of what kind of man he was. For 12 years after, Hendricks attended Patricia's vigils. He stood in the candlelight and listened to her read from the journal, where a mother learned to conjugate grief in the future perfect. By this time next year, I will have... He watched search grids and scanner chatter with the satisfaction of a man who had designed a puzzle no one could solve. His presence at vigils, his need to be inside the narrative he created, was one of the details that made parents nauseous. He told Chin where to find Sarah. The recovery would need specialists who know how to work a vertical grave. Rigging, sifting, patients measured in inches, not yards. Chin understood that bringing Sarah home would be both mercy and a second injury. You cannot recover what violence takes. You can only return what remains. The logistics of recovery and what they meant for the family were outlined starkly in the file. Dorothy Hendricks, William's wife of 42 years, told investigators she never suspected a thing. Her life tilted an hour. The man who fixed sinks and dutifully salted the walk was also the man who left a young woman at the bottom of an old mine shaft. She described her marriage as a performance she hadn't realized was a show. Intimacy practiced like lines learned offstage. I shared a bed with him, she wrote for court. I did not know him. Dorothy's statement, and the way it cracked trust down to its hinges, remains one of the case's most quoted passages. Parent in Bozeman reran years of mornings like a bad tape. The waves from the driver's seat, the cheerful voice at the crosswalk, the birthday parties where the nice crossing guard showed up with small gifts. How many times had they sent their children toward a man who had murdered someone else's child? The question has no answer that helps. The secondary trauma, measuring proximity to a predator you once thanked, rippled through the town. Deputies who'd swapped cookies and small talk with Hendricks had to rewrite their own memories. The holiday gestures, cookies Dorothy baked, chats about traffic safety, went suddenly sour in the mouth. Those relationships, deliberately cultivated, were part of how he stayed invisible. Search volunteers pored over old photographs with new eyes. There he is, a row back, face open, hands ready. The expression everyone had read as concern now exposed as satisfaction. Those photos, once the town's pride, became evidence of audacity. On September 18, 2021, the courtroom was full. The benches felt too small for the size of the truth in the air. Judge Margaret Thompson had presided over hundreds of cases, but this one carried a different gravity. A man trusted with guard duty at the gates of childhood had used that trust as camouflage. The scene in Thompson's long view put the sentence in context. Patricia sat in the front row, hands folded just so, the same arrangement she used when labeling boxes in the basement. She read her statement in the controlled cadence she'd polished across decades of interviews, a marriage hollowed out by the math of obsession. Friendships lost a story that wouldn't end, a life spent in a room below ground where time stopped, and a mother kept breathing because someone had to. Her words fixed the cost of persistence in the record. Richard spoke rarely, but when he did, the room leaned forward. He described the quiet labor of keeping a house running around a hole. The divorce papers signed 2 months after the arrest read like a footnote. They were, in fact, the last consequence of crime that had started 34 winters earlier. The paperwork had the finality of a gavel. Dorothy's letter was read aloud. You could feel bodies tighten when the line came, I shared a bed with Sarah's murderer, because some sentences changed the temperature of a room. The quote itself is in the record as the core of her reckoning. Judge Thompson sentenced Hendricks to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The words gave the community legal closure. They could not return the 34 years. The sentence terms and their limits were spelled out as plainly as law can speak. In the months that followed, the school district rewrote policy. Background checks deepened. Psychological screenings were added. Procedures strengthened. But too late for the children who had been taught to trust an orange vest. The policy changes, overdue and necessary, became the case's civic legacy. The FBI opened cold files on 14 other unsolved cases across Montana, asking whether Hendricks' shadow crossed other winters. The number became another kind of pin on a larger map. True crime pilgrims began to arrive, the way they always do now. Documentaries, podcasts, drone shots of roads that remember more than they can say. For the Mitchells, It was a second invasion. They had wanted answers, not an audience. The attention didn't feel like justice. It felt like trespass. Communities like Bozeman are built on ordinary trust. The crossing guard is safe. The deputy's friend is a good man. The guy who brings your paper to the porch knows your dog's name. Hendricks weaponized that trust. He learned the rhythms of a town and hid in them. He delivered cookies to the people who might have arrested him. He stood in photographs where a killer should never be allowed to stand. The BAU profile framed him as a type built to evade notice. Compartmentalized, controlled practice. For Patricia, justice didn't feel like a door opening. It felt like the moment when a recurring nightmare finally tells you it's ending. The basement stayed the basement. The boxes didn't vanish when the gavel fell. She still knew the coordinates of every pin. She still woke sometimes at 10:45 p.m. to an empty room and a watch that wouldn't move. She brought Sarah home. There's a kind of peace in that phrase. It is not the kind the movies promise. It is the kind that lets you stand in winter air and say a name without tasting iron. It is the kind that lets you walk up 13 wooden steps with both hands empty. The wall map still hangs in the basement. Red, blue, yellow. Roads braided like veins. A county fix in time. Patricia doesn't remove the pins. She doesn't need to. The colors mean different things now. Red is not just a sighting. It's a reckoning. Blue is not just unverified. It's a record of how far hope will travel. Yellow is not just a false lead. It's proof that people tried and kept trying, and that trying is sometimes the only honest verb available to the living. On the table beneath the map lies a single styrofoam cup, empty, clean, ordinary. The kind you wouldn't notice. The kind you might crumple and toss. In the story of Sarah Mitchell, a cup is how the past finally spoke.